everybody, and welcome to Getting APIs to Work. In today's episode, we say hello to Brian Otten. Hey, Brian, how are you doing?
Hey, Eric, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Brian is a fellow catalyst at Axway. He has been working a lot with organizations, and today we want to tackle a topic that we called What's the Value of an API and How Can You Measure It? Because I think that is something that a lot of organizations are struggling with or trying to get it right. And Brian, you've a lot of insight into that. So first of all, let's talk about why is that even a relevant question? What's the value of an API? How does that matter for a company?
Yeah, well, it matters because APIs are at the core of your digital strategy. So I think that's the first thing is that people forget that they're not just these little integration pieces. They are really critical for looking at your business and packaging up capabilities. And the APIs are great for that because you're not only getting the business logic, the capability, you're getting the data, but you're actually getting a consumption asset, right? So something that someone can take immediately, either a developer in your organization, someone in your ecosystem, and very quickly consume your digital products and services. So I think that's the first thing to consider, is that it's part of a business and technology strategy where you're moving to this world of open platforms and distributed deployments and all the rest of it. You've got to make sure that APIs are at the core in order to make that work. And if you want to know how well you're doing with that, then you have to start to measure what the value of the APIs are as well.
And that's the interesting topic that I think that we've picked for today, right? It's like, okay, apparently APIs are important and you have a lot of them and you want to find out how well you're doing. And for that, you probably want to measure something or you want to figure out what to improve, all these kind of traditional, I would say, controlling things that you would like to do. And in the API space, sometimes it seems to me that we're still kind of having a little bit too much of a tech focus. And I'm wondering, have you seen that as well? And if so, how does that manifest in the API space?
Yeah, very much. I mean, what we tend to do is we look at the different components of a good API strategy, and right up front with the strategic alignment part, you have to understand the stakeholders. And a lot of times when you and I talk to organizations, we're really just talking to an audience that's just, technology people, the people kind of responsible for the delivery, the running, the monitoring of what happens when people build APIs and people start using them. But we're not really engaged a lot of times at first with people who are digital strategists, business data owners and product owners, and people who really understand what their customers and partners need to go through, like that idea of the journey, right? Understanding why the API approach is so valuable, and just not having that picture of stakeholder needs and wants. It's very hard to then create some kind of metrics framework to make sure that you're delivering APIs that are of benefit and going to get the outcomes that these people need, right?
Yes, and I think one of the things that we've seen in quite a number of organizations is that there's still this kind of traditional divide between the IT side and the business side, right? And they're not connected as probably as much as they should be nowadays. And there can be quite a bit of frustration even on the IT side because they feel like they have to build stuff, but they don't really get the information kind of that they need. And then I think that translates then into problems of, well, how should we know what to build when we don't get the input that we need in terms of what are the design constraints, what are the goals behind it? What have you seen as a successful, at least occasionally successful strategy, how you can bridge that gap a little bit better?
Yeah, this is where it's useful to think about what you just said, Eric, and breaking that up even more into, well, you've got the work that's happening. So you've got the people and you've got the organizational alignment, but then you've also got an understanding of what these, I call them like pipelines, like the business ops pipeline or biz ops pipeline. You've got developers building, releasing, changing applications and redeploying and managing that whole side of it. In the middle is this whole product piece. And that's where I've seen companies doing this successfully, is making sure that those lines are kind of blurred, and the people who are traditionally more DevOps, more development focused, can actually interact directly at that right part of the life cycle. That's the key, is making sure that when you're about to decide what the value is of this digital product, why APIs are going to make us go faster, why they're going to make it easier to make that consumable, all the rest of it, they can be part of that process. Because, let's face it, it's a digital world. I mean, the business and technology models have converged in the platform world. Everybody's got to be part of that, because that will make the product better. If people are co-collaborating, if they are working towards a common set of goals, and that's when metrics become kind of important, because if you don't know you're going to be measured on something, then you can't really take that into account. You can't plan for it, and you can't modify your behaviors as well to encourage people to work together in that way.
So then what do you measure?
Yeah. Number of APIs.
It's a trick question. No, it's not a trick question, right? It's an interesting question, I think, a very interesting one, right? Because like you said, measuring is important. It allows you to do all kinds of good things. Measuring also can lead you down maybe the wrong path if you measure the wrong things, right? So what have you seen as good patterns of what to measure, and maybe also what not to measure?
Yeah, well, a good pattern is always based on a really good understanding, like I said, of these pipelines of work, the biz ops, the product ops, and DevOps, but also aligning that to really what you might call, and what has now been established as the full API management lifecycle. This has been a lot of talk about that. There's ways that analysts can rate whether one solution is better than another in full lifecycle management, but it's not the tech alone that's going to do that, right? So you have to start thinking about, well, not only are we measuring once the APIs are there and they're deployed and they're being used, and developers are subscribing to them and they're using them and developing with them, but it's also, what are we doing to make the delivery better? I think those are the KPIs that really get people excited at the IT leadership, the business leadership together. Because for IT leadership, you're going faster, right? You're delivering more. For the business people, you're actually doing more product work. You're launching more things. You're onboarding more partners. So speed to delivery is key. The quality becomes key, because if it's difficult and there's a lot of ping-ponging back and forth, or you're not catching things early on, this is why that co-collaboration I talk about in the product ops world, where you're looking at the value proposition, you're looking at the business model of the API, you're going to head off all of those problems, and you'll be able to measure quality from a perspective of value, or a notion of value. And then you'll be able to say, have we just developed some little connector piece, or is this a business API? Can we call it a business API or a business capability API? You'll have a way to do that, and a framework to do that.
But sometimes, the thing that I still struggle with a little bit, right? It's like sometimes you need those, let's say, those building blocks, right? And these building blocks have value. I liken them to, let's say, if you look in the car industry, right? Every car company pretty much nowadays has a platform model, right? Where they have building blocks and they assemble those to new car models, and they have gotten really good at making sure that they have the right building blocks, so that then they can actually build cars in an effective way, right? And I think that part is still one that is really hard to grasp. It's like, what's a good building block like? Because a building block, right, like if we look at the cars, right, let's say a building block would be something like a car seat, right? Nobody would ever kind of measure just the car seat in itself, I guess. On the other hand, if you have one that you can use in a number of car models, it probably is very good for your car delivery machine. right? So how would you, like, just looking at this kind of mental model, right? Like those building blocks, how can you come to a mindset where you identify those building blocks, you build them, and then you also have a system where you can say, oh, this is a good building block, or you can also say, well, this one didn't work too well, and let's give it another try or something like this.
Yeah, I think that's always been the key challenge is how do we make the API fit for any specific given purpose or business capability or whatever we want to call that, while making it generic or abstracted away enough. Because I think that is another key is that you have to make sure that the APIs you're building, even those foundational building block ones, they are still abstractions of the complex stuff that's going on in the systems underneath. So I think the level of abstraction will start to drive what you might call a reuse rate. And so what you're talking about is, and that is part of adoption. And people forget that even those foundational building blocks, like you talk about the analogy of the chair, right? Can we reuse it? Did we build it for one model, but can we use that component, that chair across a whole set of maybe 5 cars that we can launch 5 models this year instead of 1 because we had to redo every single little piece of it. That might be what the value is, but in a mass production and when you're trying to do this at scale, and that's the key is doing this at scale means that you need to have these building blocks. And I think part of the adoption KPIs or adoption part of the measurement framework is how many times you can reuse a given API, especially those foundational ones. And do they cover all of the domains, if you like, or all of the capability areas that you've got so that you can go faster? And I think that's where the delivery and adoption comes together. But yeah, I think people forget that the foundational APIs are part of adoption. And the way to do that, you asked the second part of that, which is how do you guide people towards that? So it's like, well, because you've come across this, like, well, why do we have to build the whatever claims API, or why do we have to build the customer API? My team just needs to deliver this application. But you're forgetting that if you get that right and you involve a bunch of people up front to understand what is the most likely consumption pattern here and how does it fit the value, then you're going to build something that another team could use immediately and make them go faster. So I think that's where the foundational building blocks, getting those in place and not leaving it to chance, not leaving it to the water cooler. Oh, I didn't know that team was building that API and we could have used that, and that happens all the time. Whereas like you and I are talking about the flow, the pipelines of work, where if you talk about the value proposition up front, if you have a nice program across your API delivery, the strategy is to then make sure that people are working together. And then we come to a place where the platform can help people discover these foundational building blocks and make sure that the reuse is happening, because it's not going to happen by magic or by, like I said, water cooler osmosis or whatever.
I like that viewpoint a lot that you just brought up, that in the end, like, the reuse is very much a collaborative aspect of it, right? Where you say, it's like, what do I contribute to the overall good in the organization, right? Mm-hmm. How do I help the organization being more successful? And I may do that by just kind of building the one thing that I'm tasked to build right now. But if I build it right, then I might actually create many more value streams, right? That also will go through part of what I've built, and that will can have a tremendous impact. And I think that is something where we still sometimes think too much in the kind of just the tech way, I think, and not enough in the ideas of how can we all work together, kind of loosely coupled, but still collaborating, right? I think that's kind of the magic that we try to make happen.
Yeah. I mean, developers, we work with developers. We've been developers in the past. There's always that tendency to, and it's trust too, right? So, and a quality product. So if you have something of quality that people want to reuse, that is the way good viral products spread. And you have to think about those, especially those foundational or those key capability APIs in the same way. You know, you're not going to force people to use it. That was the big problem I saw in the service-oriented architecture world, where we're just going to build these things and then reuse, and we're going to force, you know, thou shalt use, you know, the customer API, thou shalt use the, you know, product API. But you know, that behavior never works like that, especially with developers. They're like, I'm not using that, especially if it doesn't fit the need, if they can't understand it, it's incomplete, there's no documentation, which is the big complaint, right? I'm not using it. And developers will immediately go into, you know, the reflex mode of, well, I'll just build it myself. And then once again, you're cutting off that reuse. You're making it take longer because you're injecting something into your backlog that you could have just pulled off the API catalog, right? And maybe extended it if you needed to. But think about how much faster that is than having to. And now you've got a potential for a different representation of the data as well, which is even worse. So it's about guiding behavior. I think measurement and measuring what matters is about, you know, constantly getting the feedback and being able to use those insights to drive different ways of behavior and co-collaboration for sure.
So I think in the end, we can come to the conclusion that the value of an API product then is a lot in how much it contributes kind of to the overall good of the organization, right? It's not so much just in I don't know, does it use the right HTTP methods or something like this, right? Is it a valuable building block? I think that is maybe the question that you should ask yourself in the end. And right, so just coming back to the example of cars again, right? Like there's still maybe 5 different car seats that you can build into cars, right? But like if you have these 5, well, that's a nice palette to work on, right? And then I think each of those is in itself a valuable building block. And I think that's kind of the culture that you want to have. Do you have any kind of closing words for us and leading us up to our next conversation? Because I really want to keep this conversation going, looking at API products and really looking more at the product angle and not so much just at the API angle. So what would you think are interesting topics we should explore in more depth?
Yeah, I think I love the conversation because it's great to be able to bring what we're learning from different organizations. And, you know, a lot of this stuff could be considered like thought leadership content or whatever. And I hope people learn a lot from this. But it's then about, what are you going to do next? Like, how do you do it? This is the big thing that organizations are stuck with, and the people, our partners and our friends out there trying to struggle through this, how to organize it. So I think once you've got an understanding of what kind of measurement framework you need for APIs and the quality and measuring the effectiveness of those, you've got, you know, like we said, the delivery, adoption, performance, even, you know, how well is it performing, and then business or value KPIs. Once you have an understanding of that, then it's about thinking about the strategy and how people are going to be ready to even measure that stuff. And I think that's where we can start talking about, and we've talked about it before, the value of an API program. How do you use the dashboards and the wonderful stuff, you know, the metrics that come out to actually guide it and make sure that it's on the rails and that people are able to adopt the API first way in your organization and do it at scale? So I think that's the next challenge, is to say, what do we do and how do we make sure people are doing the behaviors and working together in a way where we could even possibly begin to measure that kind of stuff?
Okay, then I think we have a plan. Then I think the next thing we should talk about would be a little bit more of a framework of the kinds of things you can measure and how to use them and how to structure them, so that then you can start measuring them. And you can also, like you said, right, start measuring them not just at the level of the individual product, but really at the level of how well do these things all fit together, because that's in the end, right? if you just have good car seats, right, there's not much you can do.
Right.
So you want to turn out those cars.
Yeah, I mean, it appeals to the business and the tech people, if you like, right? We talked about those stakeholders, and for the business people, they'll see, is this having an impact on the business? For the technology people, quite often there's a very simple answer to say, well, I'm going to be judged on this decision I made to buy transformative technology, and API management solutions are part of that. So I've got to protect my investment. Like, is this making a difference? Well, the APIs and the platform they're running on, if you can't measure that, then you won't be able to go back and say, yeah, that thing was a bargain, or that thing was, let's renew that because it's essential now. Yeah. So yeah,
okay,
sounds
great.
good.
Brian, thanks so much for joining. I hope you liked the conversation. I hope everybody else liked it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment if you like the topic. And also, if you have any questions, let us know. We're definitely planning on keeping the conversation going. I think API product management is something that a lot of organizations are looking at nowadays. So thanks a lot again, Brian, and see you next time.
Thanks, Eric. See you.